Hello and welcome back to the Jolly Ranchers YouTube channel. I'm on vacation right now, so this is the second out of 3 videos making an inventory that works in Unity with Fungus. So let's get into the video. So here's where we left off last time. We have an inventory that can open and it has an item slot in it. And when it's open, we don't move. And when we open an inventory in dialog, we can go right back to where we left off. Before we build the item slot script and the item script itself, we need to make a script so that we can tell whether the player is walking to an object or whether we are using an item on an object. So we are going to create the verb game object. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a UI canvas. And I'm just going to drag this canvas down here so it's not childed under anything. And I'm going to call this canvas verb or action or something like that. Because this is where we're going to keep track of whether we're walking to something or whether we're using an item on something. I am going to go ahead and create another text box underneath this. And I am going to name this action text. You don't have to have this text box that, in the text box it will say walk to chair, walk to something like that. But I'm going to show that because it's what Monkey Island has. You can easily just take out this text box if you want. So under our verb game object, I'm going to go here and I'm going to add component. And you will press new script here. And you will name the new script verb or action or something like that. And as you can see here, I have already written this script, and so we're going to go over it once again. Up at the top here, you can see that I've tried using a lot of namespaces here, but these ones that are just sort of dulled out just slightly means they're not being used, so I can go ahead and erase those and add them back in if I need. So all we're doing is we're using the Unity engine namespace, we're using TextMesh Pro namespace, so we can write text into the TextMesh Pro box, and we're using Fungus. I have a public string. This is just so that when we switch to walking, we can put in the inspector, right down here, what we want the walking text to be. You could make it walking to chair or walking to desk or whatever string you want to use for walking, or look at chair, look at desk if you don't like the walk to syntax. And I did the same for the use string so that when we're using an object it will just say use object on chair or something like that. I have a public string for the current clickable that we're hovering our mouse over, so that when we're hovering over the chair, we get a string from the clickable object. And we're just going to show you that I edited the clickable 2D script one more time, and I added a string to it. Let's go in here to our clickable 2D script. I added a public string called clickable name so that we can control what name appears when you hover over something, walk to chair, walk to desk, instead of walk to chair, clickable object, or something like that. So this is going to be a reference to that. I have a public inventory item. We haven't done the inventory item script yet, but we will very soon. But I have a reference to a public inventory item called current item, which will keep track of what item we are trying to use on another thing in the world. A public string called hovered item slot, so that if I'm trying to use an item on another item, it recognizes the item slot that I'm hovering over, that I'm using the current item on to combine items. This is a variable called combinability, so that we can ascertain whether 2 items are combinable, and I have a reference to the inventory itself. Here, we're using a new kind of variable called an enum, or an enumerator, and it just allows us to keep track of a list of actions that our character can take. You see, right now we only have walk and use, but the original Monkey Island had pull, push, talk to, open, close, and a number of other actions that the player could take. So if you wanted to add more actions, you would just put a comma here and add your look action or something like that. But for now, I think Monkey Island may have overcomplicated it slightly in my own game design brain, so I'm just having two actions. And then I have a variable to keep track of what action that we're actually using. So I've created this action system, basically, and now I have a action variable called verb, which will keep track of what action we are, and by default we are action.walk. So the default action that our player will take is walk to things, which I think makes sense. You know, the default action of your player is walking from thing to thing and clicking on it. And then I have a reference to our text box, and finally, I have a reference to a list of flowcharts. I'm going to once again get every flowchart in our scene so we can call blocks if we need to. In our start method, I got the text mesh pro GUI in the child of our verb object. As you can see, our text mesh pro text box is a child of our verb object where the script is placed. So I use the method getComponent in children. And then I set the verb textbox.text to nothing to start with, so that before you hover over anything, it doesn't say walk to, it just says nothing. And then as soon as you hover over something, it says walk to blank. I thought that was nice, but you can already go ahead and put this as walk to if you want to. And then I found all of our flowcharts in our scene by find objects of type, and I found the inventory with find object of type inventory. So that's our start method. And as you can see, we don't use an update method because we're going to be calling these methods from other scripts. This one is called update verb textbox, and it starts with another method, set verb in flowchart. And this is why we needed the list of flowcharts, because we need our flowchart to know what verb we are in, so that when we click on something, it can say, oh, you are using an object. And if you're using the key on the door, then we can go ahead with a certain cutscene. So this is the method for achieving that. I'll show you, of course, how it works, but this just loops through for each flowchart in our list of flowcharts. If that flowchart has the variable verb, which none of our flowcharts do so far, but we're going to add a variable called verb, which is a string variable. So we want to flowchart.set string variable verb. Then we are going to convert our verb variable, which holds the action that we are currently doing, and we're going to convert that verb variable to a string. And conveniently, that string will turn out to be walk or use, whatever string we put up here in our enum list. And then we're not only going to want to set a verb variable in flowchart, we also want to know what item we're using, so that if we're using the correct item, then we can trigger dialogue that says, you solved the puzzle, or this is the wrong item, but it was close and good try, but it won't cut it, you know? So you can give the player feedback on your puzzles, and you can have them actually solve the puzzles if they have the correct item. So this just says if the player has no currently selected item, we'll stop this function. That means if we're at this point, the player has selected an item and they would like to use it on something. So we're going to set another variable in our flowchart called current item, which we'll go set right after this. And we will set the string variable current item to the name of the item we are currently using. So let's go make the two variables verb and current item in our flowchart so that we can go ahead and set them. So here is our list of variables. I'm going to go here, I'm going to create a string variable, and I'm going to name it exactly what I did in the script, which is lowercase verb. And that is all I have to do here, because our method will set it by itself. But you could go ahead and set it by default to walk, because that is the default verb that our player will take. And that is all we have to do here. Now, I went ahead and I created a separate flowchart which will hold item interactions. I spoke with someone on the Discord who used about 100 flowcharts in one scene of their game, and they actually studied whether it was better to have a big flowchart full of lots of blocks and lots of commands within the blocks. And they said that the performance that Fungus gets is actually better if you have many small flowcharts. And I find that's actually helpful for organization as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a flowchart. And if you haven't done that yet, you can go up to Tools, Fungus, Create, Flowchart, and create a new flowchart. I named mine Items Flowchart, and I am going to name this Current Item with a capital I, exactly how I did it in the script. And there's no default current item, so I'll leave that blank. And now we can use that method to set the correct verb and item in our flowchart whenever we update our verb text box, which we will be doing frequently. Also, by the way, our update verb text box takes in the current clickable that we are hovering over. And I will show you all 3 places we use this update verb text box method. So after set verb and flowchart, if our verb is walk, then we're going to set the combinability variable to false. So we are not combining items right now if we're just walking around. And we're going to set our verb text box equal to walk string plus current clickable. So if our current clickable is nothing, then it will just say walk to nothing. And if our current clickable is anything else, it'll say walk to desk. And as you can see up here in my walk string, I put a space after walk to, and that will allow there to be a space in the sentence. But if you don't want to put that, you can use something like this down here to add a space to your text box. So if the action is use, if we're using an item, then if the inventory.canvasgroup.interactable is true, if the inventory is open, then combinability is true, because this is how we're going to combine items. When we are already using an item and the inventory is open, we are going to allow the player to combine items in the inventory. So we're going to set the verb text box to the use string plus a space plus the item that we are using with the item slot that we're hovering over. So it's going to look like use key with ticket. You could even add a question mark if you want. So if our inventory is not open and if current clickable is null, meaning we're not hovering over anything that we can combine our item with, it will just say use current item with and nothing. And then if our inventory is closed and we're hovering over something clickable, then we'll set combinability to false because nothing can be combined, but we can use the item on something clickable. So it will say use key with desk. That is the entire verb script. Let me show you where I put this update verb text box method. And I can go ahead and I can click here on the 3 references that it has. And it seems that all of them are in our item slot script. And this gives us a good opportunity to begin working on our item slot script. So go ahead and save this verb script. It is done, and we are going to make sure to use this method, make sure to set this verb variable in our other scripts to determine what action our player is performing at any given time. Okay, and now all of the errors that you have about there's no script called item slot, there's no script called item, we're going to fix those things immediately. So I created a new folder called items. And this is how you will make your items. They are something called Scriptable Objects. And the way you create the script is that you can create the folder and then you can right-click in the folder, go ahead and create, and then C# script will be right here. And go ahead and click on that. You won't see these things. You will see folder, but you won't see any of these things because these are custom scripts that I have made and I've put here. So go ahead and create a new C# script. I'm not going to because I already made one, and I'll show you it. This is the script you want to make. It's called inventory item, and it's a very simple script. I'm gonna delete these namespaces that I don't need, because all you need to do is using Unity Engine. And instead, it will say public class inventory item if you named it inventory item, and then it will say mono behavior. You want to erase mono behavior and replace it with scriptable object, capital S, capital O. And a scriptable object is a class you can derive from if you want to create objects that don't need to be attached to game objects. So these objects just sit in our assets folder, as you saw, like a sprite or like a audio clip or something like that. We are just going to store information we want to know about the items in our game. The first one is a public bool to let us know if we own the item or not. I called it item owned. A string that holds the item name, and a public sprite that holds the item icon, so that we can have icons that represent the items in our inventory, just like inventories usually do. Down here, I have things that have to do with combinability of items. So I have a bool that says you can check to say, is it combinable or not? Is this item combinable with anything? I have a list here that shows where you can put what items are combinable with this item. You can have multiple items in this list in case you want to combine multiple items with this item, if you want multiple possibilities for what you can combine items with. Usually games don't do this, but just in case, I wanted to give you the tool to be able to do that. Here, I have a list that corresponds with the combinable items list, and these are the success block names. So these are the blocks that you will go to in the flowchart if you combine the right item with the inventory item. I'll show you exactly how this works, but basically the first item in your combinable items list wants to correspond with the first block name in your success block names list. So if you combine the key and the ticket, you will want to go to the key ticket success block in your flowchart so that you can have the appropriate dialogue, like, wow, I can't believe this key and this ticket fit together. I wonder if this will be anything. You know, whatever you want that dialogue to be. And then the next thing in this success block names will be whatever the next combinable item is in your inventory items list. So if your first item is this key combines with the ticket, so your first item is ticket, then the next item will be the Book of Souls. That means your second success block names will be combined key with Book of Souls, and the dialogue of that block will be, I let out the souls inside the Book of Souls with this key. I wonder if anything bad will happen. So this last string is the failure block name, so that if you try to combine this combinable item, but you combine it with the wrong thing, you'll go to a block that says, well, that didn't do anything. And that just allows you to make less options that way. You know, if you combine every item with every other item, that adds up to a lot of different blocks that you have to make and a lot of different dialogue. Say if you have 8 items and you combine them all with each other, that's probably 64, if my math is right, different options of dialogue that you have to create, and that's totally possible. But in case you don't want that, you will have a general failure block to go to that says, these 2 items don't combine with each other. I'm a stupid head. So this is the item script, and I will show you quickly how to customize it. Here, you can go ahead and change if you own an item or not. We're going to set that in game with a custom command. But if you ever just want to own an item all of a sudden while you're testing your game, you can just click that on and that it'll be in your inventory. Here's where you put the name of the item that you want to appear in the item slot. Well, it's invisible right now, but you get the point. And as you can see, we haven't moved our action text to a nice location, so I'm going to go ahead and drag that down while I'm thinking about it. And I'm going to drag it out nice and long. Here's where you can put in the sprite that you want. You can either drag it in, or you can click this little circle over here and choose your inventory item icon that you want to use. You'll want these to be roughly the same size as each other. You'll want to make images of similar resolutions so that they look similar when they're in your inventory. Here's where if you want to combine this item, let's say I want to be able to combine this ticket with the key for some reason, for some puzzly lore-based reason, then I will check combinable because this item is combinable. And then your combinable items list will look something like this. It'll open up, it will say 0, but you can go ahead and drag in the item from your items folder right in there, and it will populate the list. Or you can go ahead and make the list a little bit bigger and do it that way. And then the corresponding block name, as you can see here in my items flowchart, if I open up the flowchart window, I have a block here named key ticket with a custom command that allows me to add or remove items. Here you can see I remove the keys, I remove the ticket, and I add the key ticket inventory item, and then I have dialogue, and then I call the exit block so that the player can walk again. That's a little preview of how the system will work, and then I have a fail block, which is just lowercase fail. It says, this is nothing, and calls the exit block. So that's just how the combining items system will work, but first we have to get our item slots up and running, which is the last thing here before we do the custom command. So here on my item slot, I'm going to scroll down and I am going to add component. You'll press new script, but I have already made that new script and I have called it item slot. And let's go take a look. So here we are in the item slot script. You are going to want these 4 namespaces using Unity Engine, using Unity Engine.ui, using TextMesh Pro, and using Unity Engine.event systems. And you can see I've implemented those right here next to monoBehavior. You put a comma, and then you put iPointer enter handler, another comma, and iPointer exit handler. And this is how we're going to figure out if we're hovering over something, if we're hovering over an item slot, and we want to send that information to our verb text box so that we know what item we're combining with what other item, and we can put it in the text box down below. This is the exact same implementation that is in the clickable 2D script, which is actually how I learned how to use this. As you can see here in the clickable 2D script, it uses Unity Engine.event systems and iPointer click handler, iPointer enter handler, iPointer exit handler. And we're going to want to make changes to our clickable 2D script as well. We're going to want a private verb variable, which references the verb script that we wrote, and I'm going to name it verb. And in my start method here, which you may need to create a start method in this script, and I said verb equals find object of type verb. We want to access that verb script that we just wrote. And down here in do pointer enter, I want to call that update verb text box that we wrote before. So I wrote verb.update verb text box, and I entered the clickable name of the clickable 2D object that you're hovering over. And that's going to give it to us. So down here in do pointer exit, I want to update the verb text box again, verb.update verb text box null, because I want to erase the clickable name from our string, because when we're not hovering over a clickable object, I don't want it to say anything anymore. We're not walking to anything, we're not using an item on anything if we have exited the clickable 2D object's range. And this is just the same clickable name variable that we have used before. It refers to the clickable itself. It's this string that we put in earlier that references desk, chair, door, window, whatever we want the clickable object to be named. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's go back to our item slot, where we are going to do a very similar thing. We are going to call the update verb text box method here as well. But first things first, I have a reference to an inventory item, which is going to be the item that is held in this item slot, a reference to the inventory, a reference to an image, which I could have named item icon, or item image. I just named it image. I would recommend maybe being more specific than I was. And I have a private TextMesh Pro UGUI, which I called text box, because that's the text box we want to fill with the item name. I could have named that item name text box, but I just named it text box. I have a reference to our verb script because we're going to want to update the verb text box, and I have a reference to our player so that we can make the player, well, let's see why I have a reference to the player before I say anything. Maybe it's unnecessary, and maybe we should delete it. So in the start method, I find object of type inventory. I get our text box component in the child object. And if we go back here and we look at our item slot layout, we have item name text box as a child of the item slot. And we're going to have that in all of our item slots. We will need to have that. So we're going to duplicate our item slot for as many slots as we want after this. Then we have a reference to find object of type verb, so we can access our verb script, and find object of type target, so we can talk to the player script. So here I have a function called display item, public void display item, and I pass in an inventory item, which I call this item. And if you'll remember from the first episode of making the inventory, we called display item and we called clear item from our inventory script, from our initialize item slots method. Here's display item and here's clear item. So these are the actual scripts that will display what item is in the item slot, and if there's no item in the item slot, then it will clear the item from the item slot. So we're going to say the item equals this item, and the initialize item slots method will determine what item goes into the item slots, so we don't need to worry about that. So we're going to set the item equal to this item. This item is what is in this item slot. That's our reference. We're going to set the text box to be equal to that item name. We're going to set the image.sprite equal to item.item icon, and we are going to set this item slot to be active. We're going to GameObject.setActive to true, which activates or deactivates the game object. So we want the item slot to be active if there's an item in it. And if there's not, then we want to clear the item. We want the item to be null, the image.sprite to be null, and we want to set this game object to false. We also might want to change the item.item name to false, but I don't think that matters because the game object will not be visible until there is another item in it again. So that might not be necessary, but you can decide. And then we have another method here, and this method, as you can see, has 0 references because this is the method we are going to attach to the button that's on our item slot. And when you click the button, then this method will launch, and I'll show you how to put that together in a second. So if there's a cutscene in progress, then I don't want you to be able to click on an item. I don't want you to be able to combine items or anything, because then we'd have to figure out a way to stop the dialogue that you are currently in and start a new dialogue with there being no overlaps and no game-breaking bugs. It's possible to figure out how to do something like that, but I don't think you need to, and so I have that as not an option. So that's why we needed the target script to tell if there is a cutscene in progress. And if there is, then you can't click this item. Nothing happens. But if you're not in dialogue, then we check to see what our current verb is. If our verb is use, and our current item is not equal to null, then we want to be able to inventory.combine items. And we'll go over the combine items method shortly. But we're going to pass in the current item that we have and the item that we are hovering over, the item in this item slot. So that's how we combine the item we first clicked on with the second item we clicked on that sits in this item slot. And if our verb isn't already use, if we haven't already clicked on an item, then we want to go ahead and set our verb to use. We want to go ahead and set the current item in our verb script to this item that we just clicked on, and we want to update the verb text box once again to make the verb text box change to use item on another item. And then if we hovered over another item slot, it would allow us to combine items. So that's how the onItemClick method works. We have two more methods here. onPointerEnter. When our pointer enters the space of an item slot, we want to let our verb script know the item slot we're hovering over so that we can write it into our text box, and we are going to update the text box once again to reflect what item we're hovering over. Same thing with onPointerExit. When we exit the item slot area, we want to let our verb script know we're not hovering over an item slot anymore, and we want to update the verb text box to reflect that. And I'm putting in null here because there are no clickable objects. The verb text box script takes in clickable object names, and when we're dealing with the item slots, those don't matter. So I just put in null every time, and it updates the rest of the text box just fine. It still does something, even though we're not passing in a clickable object. It still updates the text box. So let's go ahead and save this and go back to our inventory script to look at the method that we're going to use to combine items. This is where those success blocks that we were talking about in our inventory item script are going to come in. This is where we're going to call those success blocks. So let's go back to our inventory. And down here, I have created this beautiful chunky method called combine items. And we're going to pass in two different items into this method. That makes a lot of sense. So the first check we're going to do is if item1.combinable equals true and item2.combinable equals true, then we can continue. If one of them's not combinable, then we know we can't combine these items. This is another for loop. We went over it last time. Create our index, which we start at 0. Indexes of arrays and lists in C# start at 0, so you want to too. You want to just learn to start counting from 0 instead of counting from 1. It's something to get used to. And we're going to want to do this loop as many times as the combinable items list that we have on our inventory item. We want to run the loop as many times as then, as our index number is going up with each loop, we are going to check if that combinable item in the list is equal to our second item. We don't want to check if it's equal to the first item in the item 2's combinable list. We want to check and see if the combinable item is equal to the second item, because if it is, that's the item we want to combine with. I know this is confusing. It was confusing for me when I started. So it's checking if this item, say if we click on the ticket and then we click on the keys, it will check the combinable items list on the ticket on the first item we clicked. And if it sees keys, it's going to compare that with the object itself, with the keys. And it's going to see if this and this is the same. And if it is, then we can go ahead and combine the items. And what we're going to do to combine the items is we are going to call a block in the flowchart. So we're going to search through each flowchart in our flowchart list and check if it has a block that's on the item 1 success block names. And it's going to check the specific index number that is the same as the index number on the combinable items, like I was explaining before. If this is the first item in the list, it will go to the first success block in your success block's name list on item number 1. We're going to close the inventory. First thing, we are going to make our player stop moving by entering dialogue, and we are going to execute that block. And then we're going to stop with this function. If we don't find a combinable item, then we're going to search through our flowcharts. We're going to check the flowcharts and see if they have block that has the same name as the fail block name on your item. We're going to turn the inventory off. We're going to make our player enter dialog, and we're going to call the fail block to say those two items don't combine. So that is the combine items method. Now let's go make our item slot actually work with the button, and let's duplicate them up, and let's just revel in the glory of our inventory. So down here in our item slot, in the on-click method on the button component, you're going to press plus. We are going to drag in our item slot because we want to access the item slot script. Go down here to item slot, and we want on item click. That's the method we want to call when we click the button. And down here in our item slot script, you don't want to forget to drag in the image, the item icon, into this poorly named image variable. You don't want to forget to give it this reference because I didn't give it the reference to the item icon image in the item slot. So you're going to want to drag it in right there. And now let's start duplicating our item slots. Right now, our inventory's alpha is set to 0, so it's invisible. So just so I can watch it, I'm going to set it to 1. Okay, it's a little bit confused right now, and item slot number 1 is invisible, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to want them to be invisible anyway. I just wanted to show you. Now that should work. Each one of your buttons should be specifically set to the on item click method that is on the script that's on the specific item slot, because you want it to register the item that's on the specific item slot. So if you did this in the wrong order, you would want to drag in the specific item slot for the specific item slot number that it is and drag in that function. You wouldn't want to drag in the first item slot into item slot number 7 and set it to register the item from the first item slot. You want to use the item from this item slot. Whew. Okay, let's go in and let's just see if this is working. Okay, I forgot to turn my item slot invisible to start with, but okay, so we forgot to fill our inventory with references to our inventory items and to our item slots. As you can see down here, we have an inventory items list, which I can just shift click and grab all of my items, and I'm just going to drag all my inventory items into this list on the inventory. And I am going to want to do the same thing with all of our item slots. So open this up, shift click, and drag all of your item slots into this list. You can't drag it onto the size. You have to drag it onto item slots name itself, and that's all of our item slots. Let's go back in and let's see if that fixed the errors. Okay, and immediately it fills up with items. As you can see, my name for these items is a little too big for the text box, but that's something you can troubleshoot on your own with the size of the text box or with the length of names. As you can see, I have items that are already visible, and that's because they are the ones that I checked item owned for. So if I uncheck all of my items, if I don't own any items, then when I open and close my inventory, there'll be nothing here. But as soon as I check one of the items, I go back in the game and I open and close, then there's the Book of Souls. So this is what we're going to want to write our custom command in Fungus to do. So when I click on this chair, as you can see, it says walk to chair. Oh, look, a ticket. I look in my inventory, and I would want to see that I had actually gotten the ticket item if the dialogue says, oh, look, a ticket. And there's also one more thing, a small thing. I want this action text box to disappear when our dialogue text box comes up, and that's a really easy fix. So let's do all of those things. Let's write a custom command to add inventory items, and let's make the action text box disappear when we're in dialogue. If you are enjoying this series, please subscribe, like, and comment this YouTube channel. It's free. And wishlist my video game Kid Detective on Steam. That would help me out a lot. And if you have any questions or if you want me to cover anything, next week I believe we're finishing up. I'm on vacation, so I don't know. Thank Zach, our editor, for making this video possible this week. And until next time, stay jolly.